The stagecoach rattled into Brownsville, Texas, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, and Katherine Rose clutched her carpetbag tighter as dust swirled through the open window, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that matched the color of her apprehension. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to meet a man she knew only through letters, a rancher named Clayton Parker, who had advertised for a wife in the Boston newspaper, where she had been working as a seamstress. The advertisement had been simple and direct, unlike the flowery language some men used to disguise their true circumstances. He needed a wife. She needed to escape. The arrangement suited them both, or so she had thought when she penned her first response 3 months ago. Now, as the stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the general store, Katherine pressed her gloved hands against her thighs and tried to steady her breathing. The long sleeves of her traveling dress were suffocating in the Texas heat, but she could not remove them. She would never remove them in public. The scars that wound up both her arms like angry pink serpents were her deepest shame, a reminder of the fire that had taken her parents and nearly taken her life 2 years ago. In her letters to Clayton, she had mentioned the fire and the loss of her family, but she had been careful to omit the details of her injuries. She feared that if he knew the extent of her disfigurement, he would withdraw his offer of marriage. The driver opened the door and helped her down, his weathered face kind beneath the brim of his hat. Katherine thanked him and looked around the dusty main street of Brownsville, taking in the false-fronted buildings, the hitching posts crowded with horses, and the people moving about their business in the afternoon heat. Everything looked foreign and strange compared to the brick buildings and cobblestone streets of Boston. "Miss Rose." She turned at the sound of her name and found herself looking up at a man who could only be Clayton Parker. He was taller than she had imagined, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his work shirt. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though at the moment his expression was uncertain, almost nervous. He held his hat in his hands, and his dark hair was slightly damp, as if he had dunked his head in a water trough before coming to meet her. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Clayton, please." His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that marked him as a native Texan. "I hope your journey was not too difficult. It was long, but not unpleasant." She was acutely aware of her gloved hands, of the way the fabric clung to her wrists despite the heat. Most women would have removed their gloves by now, but she kept hers firmly in place. Clayton seemed to notice her discomfort with the heat. "Let me get your trunk and we will head out to the ranch. It is about an hour's ride, and we can stop by the creek to rest the horses and cool off if you need." "That would be kind, thank you." He loaded her trunk into the back of a sturdy wagon and helped her up onto the seat. His hands were gentle but strong, and when his fingers briefly touched hers, even through the gloves, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. They set off down the dusty road, leaving Brownsville behind, and Katherine tried to take in everything about this new landscape that would be her home. The land stretched out endlessly in all directions, dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. The sky was impossibly blue and vast, making her feel both insignificant and strangely free at the same time. "The ranch has been in my family for 20 years, Clayton said as they rode, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "My father started it with just a few head of cattle and built it up to what it is now. He passed 3 years ago, and my mother followed him 6 months later. I have been running it alone since then with the help of my foreman, Miguel, and a few ranch hands." "I am sorry for your loss," Katherine said softly. "I lost my parents as well, in the fire I mentioned in my letters. I remember. That must have been terrible for you. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The memories of that night still haunted her dreams. The smell of smoke, the roar of flames, the searing pain as burning timber fell across her arms. She had been trapped for what felt like hours before neighbors had pulled her free, but by then the damage was done. Her parents had not made it out at all. Clayton seemed to sense her distress and changed the subject. The house is not fancy, but it is solid and comfortable. There are 3 bedrooms, a parlor, and a kitchen. My mother planted roses around the front porch before she passed, and they still bloom every spring. I have been trying to keep them alive for her sake, though I confess I do not have much skill with flowers. I would be happy to tend them, Katherine offered. My mother had a small garden in Boston. I helped her with it when I was young. I would appreciate that. He glanced at her, and she caught a glimpse of relief in his eyes. Perhaps he had been as nervous about this meeting as she was. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. The heat was oppressive, and Katherine felt sweat trickling down her back beneath her high-necked dress. She longed to roll up her sleeves, to feel the air on her skin, but that was impossible. She would rather suffer the heat than reveal her scars to this man who was still essentially a stranger. As promised, Clayton stopped by a creek about halfway to the ranch. The water ran clear and cool over smooth stones, and cottonwood trees provided welcome shade along the banks. He helped her down from the wagon and led the horses to drink while Katherine sat on a large rock near the water's edge. "You must be roasting in that dress," Clayton observed as he returned from tending the horses. "Most women out here wear lighter fabrics and shorter sleeves in the summer." Katherine's hands instinctively moved to her wrists, adjusting her gloves. "I am fine, thank you." He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful, but he did not press the matter. Instead, he sat down on another rock a respectful distance away and pulled out a canteen, taking a long drink before offering it to her. She accepted it gratefully, the water cool and refreshing. "I should tell you," Clayton said after a moment, "that I am not good at pretty words or romantic gestures. I am a plain man and I will be a plain husband. But I will work hard to provide for you, and I will treat you with respect and kindness. That is what I can promise." Katherine felt something loosen in her chest. "I do not need pretty words or romance. I need safety and a home. If you can provide that, I will be grateful. Then we understand each other." They continued on to the ranch, and Katherine's first glimpse of her new home took her breath away. The house was indeed solid, built of wood and stone with a wide front porch where Clayton's mother's roses climbed up trellises on either side of the steps. The blooms were red and pink and white, their sweet fragrance carrying on the breeze. Beyond the house, she could see the barn and several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses and cattle, and pastures that stretched toward the horizon. A Mexican man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, his face weathered and friendly. "Boss, you are back. This must be your bride." "Miss Rose, this is Miguel Hernandez, my foreman and the man who keeps this ranch running smoothly." Miguel swept off his hat and bowed slightly. "Welcome, Señorita Rose. We are very happy to have a woman's presence here again. The boss, he has been lonely." Clayton's ears turned slightly red, but he did not deny it. "Miguel, can you unload Miss Rose's trunk and take it inside? Put it in the room that was my mother's." "Of course, boss." Clayton helped Katherine down from the wagon and led her up the porch steps. "I thought you might want your own room, at least for now, until we are better acquainted." Katherine felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. Many men would have expected their mail-order bride to share their bed immediately, regardless of the woman's feelings on the matter. "That is very considerate of you." Inside, The house was cooler, with thick walls that kept out the worst of the heat. The furnishings were simple but well made, and everything was clean and orderly. Clayton showed her through the rooms, pointing out where things were kept, and finally led her to the bedroom that would be hers. It was a pleasant space with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the rose garden. "I will let you rest and freshen up," Clayton said from the doorway. "Dinner is usually around 7. I am afraid my cooking is nothing special, but I can manage the basics." "I can cook," Katherine said quickly. "If you would like, I can start preparing meals." "Not tonight. You have had a long journey. Rest, and we can talk about dividing up the household tasks tomorrow." He left her alone, and Katherine sank down onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust, and she wondered what Clayton's mother had been like. Had she been happy here in this wild, lonely place? Had she loved the man who had brought her to Texas to build a life? Katherine stood and began to unpack her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe and arranging her toiletries on the dresser. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused, studying her reflection. She was not beautiful, she knew that. Her face was pleasant enough with dark hair and hazel eyes, but her features were ordinary. It was her body that bore the marks of her trauma, the scars that twisted up her arms from her wrists to her shoulders, patches of skin that were pink and puckered and ugly. In Boston, she had learned to hide them well, wearing long sleeves and gloves at all times, even in summer. Here in Texas, that would be harder, but she was determined to maintain her secret for as long as possible. That evening, she joined Clayton for dinner in the kitchen. He had prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and bacon, and they ate at a rough wooden table lit by oil lamps. The food was plain but filling, and Katherine was hungrier than she had realized. "Tell me about your work in Boston," Clayton said as they ate. "You mentioned in your letters that you were a seamstress." "Yes, I worked in a dress shop." The pay was not much, but it was enough to rent a small room and buy food. "After the fire, I had no other family and nowhere else to go, so I stayed in the city and tried to make my way. It must have been difficult being alone like that." "It was, but I managed." She did not tell him about the loneliness, the way she had felt invisible in the crowded city, the nights she had cried herself to sleep missing her parents and the life she had lost. Those were burdens she carried inside, not things to share with a man she had just met. "And you never married." "Forgive me for asking, but you must be, what, 24, 25, 23, Katherine said. "I had a beau before the fire, but after I was injured, he lost interest. He wanted a whole woman, not someone damaged." Clayton's jaw tightened. "Then he was a fool." Katherine looked up, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "You do not even know the extent of my injuries." "I do not need to. Any man who would abandon a woman because of scars is no man at all." She felt tears prick her eyes and looked down at her plate, blinking them away. "That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness. It is truth." He paused, then added more gently, "I am 31 years old, Katherine. I have lived long enough to know that what matters about a person is not what they look like on the outside, but what they carry inside. Their character, their strength, their heart. Everything else is just window dressing." She wanted to believe him, but years of hiding had made her cautious. "You might feel differently if you saw." "I would not." They finished their meal in silence, and Katherine helped him wash the dishes. As she worked, she was careful to keep her sleeves rolled down and her gloves on, even though her hands were damp. Clayton noticed but said nothing, and she was grateful for his discretion. Over the next few days, Katherine settled into a routine at the ranch. She rose early to prepare breakfast for Clayton and Miguel, and sometimes for the other ranch hands who occasionally joined them. She cleaned the house, tended the rose garden, and began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. Clayton was kind and patient, never pushing her, never demanding more than she was willing to give. They spoke to each other with careful politeness, like two people trying not to startle each other. But Katherine was always aware of her secret, of the scars she kept hidden beneath her clothing. The Texas heat was relentless, and she often felt dizzy and sick from wearing so many layers. She took to staying inside during the hottest part of the day, which suited Clayton fine as he was usually out working with the cattle anyway. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Katherine was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a commotion outside. She went to the window and saw Clayton leading a horse toward the barn, the animal limping badly. Without thinking, she hurried outside to help. "What happened?" she asked as she approached. "She stepped in a hole and twisted her leg," Clayton said, his face tight with worry. "I need to get her into the barn and wrap it, but she is skittish from the pain. Let me help." Katherine moved to the horse's head and began to stroke her nose, murmuring soft words. The mare calmed slightly, her ears swiveling toward Katherine's voice. Together, they managed to get the horse into the barn and into a stall. Clayton knelt down to examine the injured leg, his hands gentle despite their size. "It is not broken, thank God, just badly strained. She will need rest and cold compresses." "I can help with that," Katherine offered. "Tell me what to do." For the next hour, they worked together to care for the injured horse. Clayton showed Katherine how to wrap the leg properly, and she soaked cloths in cold water to reduce the swelling. It was hot work in the barn, and Katherine felt sweat dripping down her face and neck. Without thinking, she pushed up her sleeves to her elbows to keep them from getting wet. She did not realize what she had done until she saw Clayton's eyes move to her arms. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest, and quickly tried to pull her sleeves back down. But it was too late. He had seen. "Katherine," he said softly, "please do not," she whispered, tears starting to stream down her face. "Please do not say anything." He stood slowly and moved toward her, his expression gentle. "Is this what you have been hiding? Is this why you wear long sleeves and gloves even in this heat?" She nodded, unable to speak, her arms wrapped protectively around her middle. "May I see?" "No," she choked out. "They are hideous." "You will be disgusted." "Katherine, look at me." He waited until she raised her eyes to his. "I promise you I will not be disgusted. Please, let me see." Slowly, reluctantly, she extended her arms toward him. Her hands were shaking, and she could not bring herself to look at his face as he examined the scars that twisted from her wrists up to where her sleeves now rested at her elbows. The silence stretched out, and Katherine braced herself for his rejection, for the look of horror that she was certain would cross his face. But when she finally dared to glance up, what she saw in his eyes was not disgust. It was something else entirely: compassion, understanding, and perhaps something more. "These must have hurt terribly," he said quietly, his finger gently tracing one of the worst scars on her forearm. His touch was feather-light, almost reverent. "The pain was unbearable," she admitted. "For months afterward, I could barely use my hands. The doctor said I was lucky to have kept my arms at all. You are one of the bravest people I have ever met." Katherine let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Brave? I have been hiding like a coward since the day I arrived. You survived a fire that killed your parents. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You traveled halfway across the country to start over with a stranger. That is not cowardice, Katherine. That is courage." He still held her arms gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing softly over her scarred skin. "These marks do not make you ugly. They are proof that you are a survivor, that you are strong enough to endure anything. And to me, that makes you beautiful." Katherine felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked away since the fire. Tears streamed down her face, and Clayton pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as she wept against his chest. He smelled of horse and leather and sun-warmed cotton, and his embrace was solid and safe. She could not remember the last time anyone had held her like this, with tenderness and without pity. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly and looked up at him. "You truly do not find them repulsive." "I truly do not. I see only a woman who has been through hell and came out the other side. I see strength and resilience. I see beauty." Something shifted between them in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible. Katherine felt it like a physical thing, a warmth spreading through her chest and settling somewhere near her heart. Clayton must have felt it too, because his expression changed, becoming softer, more open. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "I know we barely know each other. I know you came here out of necessity, not love, but I want you to know that I am glad you are here. I am glad you answered my advertisement, and I hope that someday, maybe, you might come to feel something more than just gratitude toward me." "Clayton," she whispered, "I think that someday might come sooner than you expect." He smiled then, really smiled, and Katherine saw how it transformed his face, making him look younger and almost boyish. "Yeah. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of something good and true after so much loss and pain. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a question rather than a demand. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back, her scarred arms coming up to wrap around his neck. They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, and kissed like young lovers discovering each other for the first time. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "We should probably check on that horse," Clayton said, though he made no move to let her go. "Probably," Katherine agreed, but she did not move either. They did eventually return to caring for the injured mare, but everything felt different now. Lighter, fuller. Katherine no longer bothered to pull down her sleeves, and Clayton's eyes kept straying to her arms, not with pity or disgust, but with a kind of tender admiration that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. That evening, after supper, they sat together on the front porch and watched the sun set over the Texas plains. The sky turned gold and orange and purple, colors so vivid they seemed almost unreal. Clayton had pulled his chair close to hers, and their hands were intertwined, her scarred fingers laced with his calloused ones. "I never thought I would find someone who could accept me as I am," Katherine said softly. "I thought I would always have to hide." "You never have to hide from me," Clayton replied. "Not any part of you." "I think I am falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Clayton turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the fading light. "I know I am falling in love with you." They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Brownsville, with Miguel and his wife serving as witnesses. Katherine wore a dress she had made herself, with short sleeves that left her arms bare for the first time in public since the fire. She had been nervous about it, about the stares and whispers, but Clayton had held her hand and told her she looked perfect, and somehow that had been enough. The townspeople did stare, she noticed, but not with the horror she had expected. Most looked curious, and a few women even approached her after the ceremony to ask about the scars, their questions blunt but not unkind. Katherine found herself telling them about the fire, about her recovery, and these Texas women nodded and shared their own stories of hardship and survival. It seemed that everyone out here had scars of some kind, whether they showed on the outside or not. The wedding night was tender and careful, with Clayton treating her like something precious and breakable. He kissed her scars and told her they were beautiful, and Katherine believed him because she could see the truth of it in his eyes. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the big bed, Katherine felt more whole than she had in years. Life at the ranch fell into a comfortable pattern over the following months. Katherine threw herself into making the house a home, sewing new curtains, planting a vegetable garden, and learning to cook the hearty meals that Clayton and the ranch hands needed. She befriended Miguel's wife, Rosa, who lived in a small house on the other side of the property, and the two women would often spend afternoons together, cooking or mending or simply talking. Clayton proved to be everything he had promised and more. He was steady and reliable, up before dawn to tend the cattle and working until sunset. But he always made time for Katherine, whether it was a shared cup of coffee in the early morning or a walk around the property in the evening. He listened when she talked about her day, and he shared his own concerns about the ranch, treating her like a true partner rather than just a housekeeper. As autumn arrived and the brutal Texas heat began to ease, Katherine found herself changing in ways she had not expected. She no longer wore gloves unless she was in town, and even then, not always. She rolled up her sleeves without thinking, and she no longer flinched when people looked at her arms. Clayton's love had given her something she had lost in the fire, her sense of self-worth. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Katherine turned to Clayton with news she had been keeping secret for a week, wanting to be certain before she told him. "I am with child," she said simply. Clayton's head whipped around, his eyes wide. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. Rosa says all the signs are there. The baby should come in late spring." He let out a whoop of joy that made her laugh, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I am going to be a father. And I am going to be a mother." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but these were happy tears, not the sad ones she had cried so often in the past. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the morning sickness in the early months was difficult. Clayton was attentive and patient, bringing her crackers and tea when she felt nauseated, and taking over more of the household chores when she grew tired. As her belly swelled, he would sit with her in the evenings and talk to the baby, telling stories about the ranch and promising to teach the child to ride and rope and care for the land. Katherine had worried about how the scars on her arms might affect her ability to care for an infant, but Rosa assured her that she would manage just fine. "You are strong," Rosa told her. "Stronger than you know. Your baby will be lucky to have you as a mother." In May of 1879, after a long and difficult labor, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Clayton was beside himself with joy, holding his son with a kind of awed reverence that made Katherine fall even more deeply in love with him. They named the baby James Clayton Parker, after Clayton's father. The early days of motherhood were exhausting and overwhelming, but also filled with a joy Katherine had never imagined. James was a good baby, strong and healthy, with Clayton's blue eyes and Katherine's dark hair. She nursed him and rocked him and sang lullabies her own mother had sung to her, and gradually, she began to heal from old wounds she had not even known she still carried. Clayton was a devoted father, often taking James out to the barn or around the property, showing him the horses and cattle even though the baby was far too young to understand. "He needs to learn young," Clayton would say with a grin, and Katherine would shake her head and smile at her husband's enthusiasm. As James grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Clayton and Miguel expanded the herd and built new fences, and Katherine began selling her baked goods and preserves in town, earning extra money that she saved carefully in a tin in the kitchen. They were building something together, she and Clayton, something solid and lasting. One afternoon when James was about 2 years old, Katherine was working in the garden when she heard a horse approaching at speed. She stood, shading her eyes, and saw a rider she did not recognize coming up the road to the house. Her heart began to pound, old fears rising unbidden. In Texas, unexpected visitors could mean trouble. Clayton emerged from the barn and walked to meet the rider, and Katherine hurried over with James on her hip. The rider was a young man, dusty and tired, with an official-looking satchel slung across his chest. "Clayton Parker?" the man asked. "That is me. I have been looking all over for you. Got a telegram from Boston, Massachusetts. Came through Brownsville a few days ago, and they told me you lived out here." Katherine's heart sank. Nothing good ever came from Boston, not anymore. Clayton took the telegram and opened it, his face growing serious as he read. When he looked up, his eyes went immediately to Katherine. "It is about your mother's sister. Your Aunt Margaret." Katherine nodded slowly. She had mentioned her aunt in passing, a woman she had not seen since childhood who had moved to New York and married well. "She passed away last month. Her lawyer tracked you down through the church records. She left you an inheritance, a substantial one by the sound of it." Katherine felt the world tilt slightly. "An inheritance? But I hardly knew her. Says here she never had children of her own, and you were her only living relative. The lawyer wants you to come to New York to settle the estate, or he can arrange to have the money transferred to a bank in Texas." Katherine sat down heavily on the porch steps, James squirming in her lap. "I do not need her money. I have everything I need right here." Clayton sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "It is your money, Katherine. You can do with it whatever you want." Over the next few weeks, they corresponded with the lawyer in New York and learned the full extent of the inheritance. It was indeed substantial, enough to expand the ranch significantly, or build a new house, or send James to the best schools back east when he was older. But Katherine found that she did not care much about the money. What mattered to her was the life she had built here in Texas, with Clayton and James and the ranch. "We could use some of it to expand the herd," Clayton suggested one evening as they discussed their options. "And maybe build a bigger barn. The one we have is getting crowded." "And we could put some aside for James's future," Katherine added. "Make sure he has opportunities we never had." "We could also take a trip," Clayton said, a bit shyly. "We never had a proper honeymoon. We could go to San Antonio or even New Orleans. Rosa could watch James for a week or two." Katherine liked that idea. "A honeymoon sounds wonderful." They did all of those things. They expanded the ranch, building a new barn and buying more cattle. They put money in the bank for James's future. And in the autumn of 1881, when James was 2.5, they left him in Rosa and Miguel's capable care and took a trip to New Orleans. The city was unlike anything Katherine had ever seen, full of music and color and life. She and Clayton explored the French Quarter, ate rich food they could not pronounce, and danced to jazz music in crowded saloons. They stayed in a fine hotel with a real bathtub, and Clayton bought Katherine a beautiful dress made of green silk that matched her eyes. But the best part of the trip was simply being together, without the demands of the ranch or the needs of a small child. They talked for hours about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Clayton told her about his childhood, about his parents, and how he had always known he would spend his life on the land. Katherine told him about her life before the fire, about her parents and the beau who had abandoned her and the long, lonely years in Boston. "I am glad he left you," Clayton said one night as they lay in bed in the hotel, listening to the sounds of the city outside their window. "If he had not, you never would have come to Texas. You never would have been mine." "I am glad too," Katherine said, snuggling closer to his warmth. Everything that happened, as painful as it was, led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." They returned to the ranch refreshed and ready to face whatever came next. James had grown in their absence, learning new words and becoming more independent. He was a happy child, curious and fearless, and he adored his father. Katherine would often find them together in the barn or out by the corrals, Clayton patiently teaching James about the animals and the land. In the spring of 1882, Katherine became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in December, she gave birth to a daughter they named Katherine Rose Parker. Caroline was smaller than James had been, but just as healthy, with Katherine's dark hair and Clayton's bright blue eyes. James was initially uncertain about this tiny intruder who took up so much of his mother's attention, but he quickly became a protective big brother, always wanting to help with the baby. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. The ranch continued to prosper, and Clayton and Katherine became respected members of the community. They attended church regularly, participated in town events, and opened their home to neighbors in need. Katherine's scars became such a normal part of her appearance that people stopped commenting on them, and eventually, she stopped thinking about them altogether. James grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He learned to ride almost before he could walk, and by the time he was 7, he could rope a calf and mend a fence post. Caroline was quieter and more bookish than her brother, preferring to help her mother in the garden or the kitchen, but she too loved the land and the animals. In 1888, when Katherine was 33 and Clayton was 40, they welcomed their third child, a son they named David Parker. David was a surprise, as Katherine had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but he was a welcome surprise nonetheless. He was a sweet-natured baby who grew into a cheerful little boy, adored by his older siblings and doted on by his parents. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that killed the grass and forced them to sell off part of the herd. There were harsh winters that tested everyone's endurance. There was the time James broke his arm falling from a horse, and the time Caroline nearly died from scarlet fever. But through it all, Katherine and Clayton faced each challenge together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1890, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Clayton reached over and took Katherine's hand. Her arms were bare in the warm evening air, the scars faded now to pale silver lines that caught the light. "You remember the day we met?" he asked. "When you stepped off that stagecoach looking so scared and determined." "I remember," Katherine said with a smile. "I was terrified. I thought you would take one look at me and decide I was not good enough." "I took one look at you and thought I was the luckiest man alive," Clayton said, "and every day since then has only confirmed it, even when I burned the Sunday roast, especially then." He grinned, then grew more serious. "I mean it, Katherine. You made this house a home. You gave me a family. You made my life complete in ways I did not even know it was incomplete." Katherine felt tears well up in her eyes. "You saved me, Clayton. You looked at the worst parts of me and told me they were beautiful. You gave me back my life." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as James chased Caroline around the yard while little David toddled after them, giggling. The roses that Clayton's mother had planted were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy on the evening air. The sky was beginning to turn pink and gold with the sunset, painting the Texas plains in shades of fire. "I love you," Katherine said softly. "I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, but I love you even more now. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much." "I love you too," Clayton said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing her scarred fingers. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. You are my heart, Katherine Parker. As the sun set over the ranch they had built together, Katherine thought about how far she had traveled, both physically and emotionally. She had come to Texas as a broken woman, hiding her scars and her pain, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she had found healing and hope and a love so deep and true that it had transformed her completely. The scars would always be there, of course. They were a part of her now, a permanent reminder of what she had lost and what she had survived. But they no longer defined her. She was Katherine Parker, wife of Clayton and mother of James, Caroline, and David. She was a rancher's wife, a homemaker, a gardener, a friend. She was strong and capable and loved beyond measure. And whenever she looked at her arms and saw those silver lines winding up to her shoulders, she did not see ugliness or shame. She saw survival. She saw strength. She saw, as Clayton had told her so many years ago, beauty. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Clayton to slow down a bit as age began to catch up with him. Caroline met a young teacher from Brownsville and married him in a lovely ceremony at the church, though she and her husband stayed close, building a small house on the Parker property. David showed an aptitude for numbers and business that surprised everyone, and he began handling the ranch's finances and contracts. Clayton and Katherine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining new lines. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew richer and deeper with time, like good wine aging in a barrel. They still held hands on the porch in the evenings. They still kissed each other good morning and good night. They still found joy in small things, in each other's company, in the family they had created. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Clayton surprised Katherine with a gift. It was a painting, commissioned from an artist in San Antonio, showing the ranch house with Katherine standing on the front porch among the roses. In the painting, her arms were bare, the scars clearly visible, and she was smiling. "So you will always remember," Clayton said as she stared at the painting with tears in her eyes, "that you are beautiful just as you are." Katherine looked at the painting, at the woman she had become, and then at the man who had made it all possible. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "I ask myself the same thing every day," Clayton replied, pulling her into his arms. In the spring of 1899, Caroline gave birth to Clayton and Katherine's first grandchild, a little girl named Rose Margaret. Katherine held her tiny granddaughter and felt the circle complete. She had survived fire and loss and despair. She had crossed a continent to find a new life. She had been loved and had loved in return. She had raised children and built a home and created a legacy that would continue after she was gone. And through it all, she had been blessed with a man who looked at her scars and saw only beauty. As Katherine rocked her granddaughter in the chair on the front porch, with Clayton sitting beside her and the Texas sun warm on her face, she thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 21 years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the journey would be hard but worth it, that love and healing were waiting just around the corner. But perhaps that woman would not have believed it. Perhaps she needed to make the journey herself, to learn through experience that scars do not define a person, that beauty comes in many forms, and that true love sees past the surface to the heart beneath. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton asked, noticing her faraway expression. "I was thinking about how grateful I am," Katherine said, "for all of this, for you." "Me too," Clayton said simply, and that was all that needed to be said. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and over the next few years, Caroline and her husband added 2 more children to the family, while David married a girl from town and built his own house on the property. The Parker clan grew larger and more boisterous, with grandchildren running everywhere, filling the house with laughter and noise. Clayton's health began to fail in his mid-60s, his joints stiffening with arthritis and his heart growing weaker. But he remained cheerful and engaged, delighting in his grandchildren and still taking slow rides around the property when he felt up to it. Katherine cared for him with the same tenderness he had always shown her, and they spent many evenings sitting together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun set over the land they both loved. In the summer of 1905, Clayton passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Katherine beside him. He was 73 years old and had lived a full and happy life. The entire community turned out for his funeral, and person after person spoke about his kindness, his integrity, and his love for his family. Katherine grieved deeply, but she did not break. Clayton had taught her to be strong, had shown her that she was capable of surviving anything. And so she did survive, leaning on her children and grandchildren, finding comfort in the memories of their life together. She continued to live at the ranch, helping where she could but mostly enjoying her role as matriarch of the family. She tended the roses and the vegetable garden, played with her grandchildren, and told stories about their grandfather to anyone who would listen. In the evenings, she would sit on the porch alone, remembering the man who had changed her life so completely. Katherine lived to the age of 79, passing away in the spring of 1934 surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. In her final moments, she thought she saw Clayton waiting for her, young and strong again, with his hand extended and that smile on his face that had always made her heart skip a beat. The ranch remained in the Parker family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each one adding their own chapter to the family story. But the tale that was told and retold, especially on warm summer evenings when the family gathered on the old front porch, was the story of Clayton and Katherine, the rancher who had advertised for a wife and found his soulmate, the mail-order bride who had arrived with scars she tried to hide, only to discover a man who saw nothing but beauty. It was a love story for the ages, one that had begun with a chance meeting on a dusty Texas afternoon and had lasted for more than a quarter of a century. It was a reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that true beauty lies beneath the surface, and that sometimes the most broken people can build the strongest and most enduring bonds. And whenever the Parker descendants looked at the old painting that hung in the ranch house, the one showing Katherine with her arms bare and her face radiant with joy, they remembered the lesson she and Clayton had taught them all, that scars are simply proof that we have lived, that we have survived, and that we have loved. And that is beautiful indeed.